Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Unversed podcast. Danny here, and today we're going to be talking about Dr. Stone. Thanks, Viz, again for giving us an early copy. This is coming out September on the first week, and this is debuting in the U.S. It's pretty popular right now in Shonen Jump. It's one of the big heads, and for good reason. Art by Boichi, and the story is by Riichiro Inagaki. Now, if you don't know these names, you should. And I never thought I wanted a team up more like this. So if you don't know Boichi, just amazing artwork. This is the guy that did Sun Can Rock. Now, we've talked about it like years before on the podcast before, but like literally just visually stunning. Like, oh my gosh, it's incredible art. And of course, the writer wrote Ice Shield 21. Which is the football sports manga, which is really good. You know, I'm not a big football guy, but I am a fan of Ice Shield 21 for sure. And yeah, so they decided to team up on Weekly Shonen Jump and do Dr. Stone. Now let's check out the synopsis, shall we? One fateful day, all of humanity was petrified by a blinding flash of light. After several millennia, high schooler Taiju awakens and finds himself lost in a world of statues. However, he's not alone. His science-loving friend, Senku, has been up and running for a few months, and he's got a grand plan in mind to kickstart civilization with the power of science. So that's basically where we're at right now with this manga. Starts off very normal. You know, already you got to see how good the artwork is for this manga. And It kind of starts off like, yeah, I remember these are high school kids, you know, and of course it's Shonen Jump, so the best to relate. And I didn't really know what to expect throughout, what's it called? The amount of time that passes. That one is really crazy. We're assuming it starts off in present day. And I also, before we get into what year it is, the main character, right? I mean, I guess you could say main character Taiju, right? Just your typical average high schooler who has a lot of stamina and all that. We see the world in his perspective, right? So when everybody got turned into stone, their consciousness was still there. That's the most crazy part. That they are conscious and aware of everything that's going on. However, it's like, you don't feel anything, you don't hear anything, you don't see anything. You can't do it. You're just locked inside your mind for a very, very long time. Senku, he meets up with Senku eventually, and he was counting the seconds of when he would wake up, right? Just to prove like his intellectual is up there. And they said the year is 5738. So this is like over 3,000 years later. Pretty crazy stuff. And the character designs, you know, some are simple. Senku is definitely a protagonist with his style. And so this manga's weird. It's like, it gives us like a thing, to think like, oh, okay, we know who the antagonist or who the main character is. Right, but I don't really know. You would expect, you know, like the first character you see is the main character, right? So that would be Taiju. However, he doesn't truly feel like a main character. I mean, it's through his perspective in the beginning, early on, but then as we get to further into the manga, we find out like, well, it's mainly Taiju and Senku. Right? It's kind of their perspective because it's just them for a good while in this volume. And I think that's the interesting part of this manga is, I mean, I wouldn't say there's really a main character. I mean, if there is, it's Senku because it's Dr. Stone, right? That's the title of it. He's on the front cover and he's a he's like this big science guy and he's mainly coming up with everything. And it's, you know, it's also one of those mangas where it's like, okay, we're going to restart civilization, but they're teaching us some science stuff. So like elements, like how to create sulfur and all that, like gunpowder and all that stuff, you know. So it has that aspect to it. But even then, I wouldn't really call Senku a main character. He's not really that interesting of a character at first, right? He seems your typical, he's so smart that everybody, like, he doesn't even need to bother with anybody else, because what's the point? They're not as smart as him. They won't understand where he's coming from in that kind of aspect, right? And he does get interesting later on. And I think that's mainly just what he's doing, right? It's just like, oh, all this science stuff that he's explaining to us. Okay, cool. I can get that. And however, so they're like, okay, they're trying to figure out how to get people, de-stoned, essentially, right? To come back into the world. And they spent like months working on this. And, winter passed eventually, and I was like, oh man, this is a great design for Taiju, right? He grew out a beard, and he's got like this, like he's just rocking fur, you know, and stuff. Like he's got like his weapons too. I'm like, oh, this is looking pretty sick. And then that was used for a gag. There's definitely a bunch of gag scenes in here, which is not unfamiliar with these guys, right? Like Boichi, he definitely had his comedic stuff in Sunken Rock and Inagaki. You know, it's Aisha 21, it's a sports manga. Of course, there's going to be a bunch of comedy in there. So it's not really unexpected to see comedy in here with like facial reactions and just lines and all that kind of stuff. Eventually they get caught, or eventually they find a way to de-stone people, right? It takes a while to collect whatever they need to collect to do this to people, but eventually they get stuck in a bind, and then they bring in our third character, Tsukasa Shishio, which is, he is also a high schooler. The crazy thing is, he has a nickname, which was, what was it, like the primate of a high school or whatever. He's just the strong guy, you know? Which is like kind of ridiculous. That's one aspect of this manga. It's ridiculous, you know. I will admit that, because the first thing we see him do is fight like a bunch of lions, and he defeats them. So it's like, what? Like, what's going on? You know, and he's like physically fit, obviously, and he's got like that long hair going on, kind of looking like Nikali actually from SF5. So that's pretty interesting too. Oh yeah, the strongest primate high schooler was his nickname. It's like, that's just kind of ridiculous. Like, he does have that Tarzan look going on. So he shows up, and then, you know, later down the line we find out like his true intentions about restructuring the world, and we just see what the characters deal with that. Now, the interesting part about this manga is the characters all have a unique design on them, and basically, yeah, this character has it too. So when the, I guess, the stones come off their body, they crack, and those cracks leave scars on their body. So every character is going to have like some on like their face or on their body somewhere. So that's an interesting thing. I thought it was just an artistic choice, which I think it is in the long run, but it was cool that they gave a justification for that. And I'm going to say, like, this is pretty good. Was in 7 chapters are in this volume, and it has a good pace. It's definitely going somewhere interesting. I think it will only get better when you introduce more characters, right? So like, they have this liquid to bring characters out of the stone effect or whatever, and I think it would be interesting to find other people who just got out themselves, right? We still don't know the answer to how Taiju and Senku got out, right? There's really no explanation. It's just one day like the stuff broke off, and Taiju went to Senku, was like, hey, I've been waiting like 6 months, bro. Like, what took you so long? And it's cool. So yeah, it's definitely worth a read. And yeah, I mean, just go check it out. It's coming out again in September. And the first week, it's $10, typical standard Viz Shonen Jump pricing, right? And yeah, I was surprised by the size and the amount of content we got in this first volume. It's really good. So definitely pick up Dr. Stone when it comes out, guys. It's worth a read. And plus, you know, like, both of these guys, like, to think like they are going to team up. You know, the writer from Aisha 21 with the mangaka of Sunken Rock. Like, wow. It's definitely interesting. It's an interesting concept. Like, wow, we're really getting this caliber of artist for this kind of story, you know, is interesting in itself, right? I wouldn't expect that from this genre, essentially, right? And yes, this is a genre I do like, because it's, you know, it's kind of like a post-apocalyptic type of deal, you know, like Cage of Eden and all that. So I always am a fan of those kind of settings, and this did not disappoint. So again, yeah, definitely check it out, guys. And thanks again, Viz, for giving us a copy to check out. And give us your thoughts when you get to pick it up and read it. You know, if you have any questions as well, you can always email us at unversedpodcast@gmail.com for those questions, comments, concerns again. And follow us on social media, anywhere you go, at Unversed Podcast. Stay updated with us. And that's pretty much it for this episode. Stay tuned for the next review. I think it's going to be an interesting one. I haven't checked it out yet, but I will, and that'll be out soon. So keep an eye on that. Thanks, guys, for listening as always. And we will talk to you next time.